All right. Hey, everybody. We're back for part two of interest groups. And let's just get started. So we talked about interest groups and why they're there and all of that. And now we're going to get to some of the problems it is. And this is actually going to be, if you've taken economics, you'll recognize this term. And it's very similar to the term and the way it's used for econ. So the problem is free riders. The issue is free riders, right? And that's those who benefit from groups' activities but pay nothing for it. That is an issue for interest groups, especially the membership ones. For instance, and give you an example, all firearms owners benefit from the NRA's activity, even if they do not join. There's some 200 some million firearms owners in the country, maybe even more now. But the NRA only has about 5 million members. So that's a whole boatload of people out there who benefit from the NRA's work, but don't pay the membership fees to help them do their work. That's the idea we're talking about. So they try to solve the problem. The problem is solved in a couple of ways. And that actually one way, in a couple of different ways, they do incentives. It's incentives. Why should you join a membership group? One of those is what they call solidary incentives. The idea of pride or pleasure or status or whatever. Oh, I belong to the World Wildlife Fund, or I donate to Greenpeace, or what have you. It makes you feel good about it, or it lets you have some companionship with other people that do that kind of thing. So sort of a social reward system. The other one, and the much more common one, is to provide material incentives. Everybody wants something, right? So money or things valued in monetary terms. That's the idea. If you join up, if you join the NRA, you might get a tote bag, or they might give you a Swiss Army knife, or something like that, or whatever. You get magazines that go with it, things like that. Um, you also get member benefits, and that's the biggest part. Travel, insurance, lodging, drug discounts, things like that. This is the reason I said the AARP, right, is the largest interest group organization, and the main reason it is so big, and the main reason it has so many members, some 25 million members or so, is because of the benefits that go with it. You have access, because it's such a large group. You have access to um, the Medicare insurance that you need to pay for the things Medicare doesn't pay for, and it's very cheap comparatively. As if you're an AARP member, you get a significant discount for all of these things, for the NRA, for AARP, for whatever the other things are. You get travel benefits, you get lodging benefits, you get discounts on rental cars, discounts on hotel rooms, discounts on lots of different things. So the member benefits are a very important way that these membership groups get people to join. All right, so let's talk a little bit about social movements and some of the ideological and public interest groups that come. So they come from social movements. We talked about that before. So we'll do a little bit more out of the civil rights movement, right? The environmental movement starting in the 1970s, early 1960s. Um, there, that's a social movement that begins, for instance, early on. So well prior to early in the 20th century, maybe even the 19th. The Sierra Club begins. Much more later ones that begin, like in the 1970s, the Environmental Defense Fund, groups like that. The feminist movement creates. Early on, the League of Women Voters from a long time ago, and then since the second feminist wave in the 1960s, you get the formation of the National Organization for Women. Later on, you get the formation of another movement, the National Abortion Rights Action League, or NARAL. So you get movements that form these interest groups too. And the union movement began in the 1930s with the Wagner Act. Again, I mentioned this earlier, the very, very pro-union. But unions have been losing members ever since the 1960s. It peaked in the 60s. They've been losing members, except, and I mentioned this before in the last part of the unit, the one segment that is growing is the public employee unions, the public sector unions, for people who work for states or for the national government or things like that. There are now unions for them. All right, interest group activities. So what do they do? This is really important, and this is what the lobbyists do. Okay, they provide information. They supply. Actually, it is credible. It's not lying. It's not anything. They supply credible information to lawmakers, and the reason they have to do that is because whatever you think of them, if you like lawmakers, if you don't like lawmakers, if you think they're doing things that are horrible or you think they're doing things that are great, they are really busy. Whatever you think about them, they are very busy. and they can't do everything. They can't know anything. They're generalists. So they need information, and that's what thing that the lobbyists do. Accurate, update information. The lobbyists are the experts. You know, the National Beer Wholesalers Association is expert on beer wholesaling policy. Okay, the National Realtors Organization are the experts on the realtors' interests. And that information needs to be conveyed to the lawmakers if they want the lawmakers to pass the laws that benefit them, and that is their entire purpose. The narrower the interest, the more information is needed. So you got big interests, you got smaller interests. The narrower they are, the more information that lawmaker is going to need. Okay. One of the other things they do is give political cues inside this information. They give them to the legislators. They tell them this is what is at stake. This is how it fits into your political views. This is how it's going to help you get reelected. Whatever it is, that's what they provide them. So, for instance, liberals in government will look for cues from, say, the NAACP, AFL-CIO, which is the overarching union organization, National Organization for Women, and on and on and on. Whereas conservatives will look for cues from, like, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce or the NRA or the AMA or groups like that to provide them. And then many interest groups rate lawmakers on the group's own scale. That's what it says behind my picture there. So you can get mailers. You can get something from the AARP that says this person stands for this and this person stands for this. This person gets an A+ for retirement issues. This person, the NRA might send it out and say this person gets an A+ for Second Amendment issues, or don't vote for this person because we've given them an F in Second Amendment protection or whatever. So they do that for voters as well. You'll get them in the mail. If you're members of these groups, you'll get stuff in the mail, especially the closer election approaches, right? Vote for this guy, don't vote for that guy, that kind of thing, because this is how they'll vote or what have you. So they do a lot of that. Also, money, big part of this, right? It's less effective than we think, though. And we're going to talk about, again, like I said in the first part of this, we'll have a whole segment about money and campaign finance. But it might be less effective than you think because, and this is, if you go back to Unit 1, maybe eating into that hyperpluralism area. The proliferation of these political action committees has reduced the influence of individuals. They are so big and there are so many of them that they might not be as successful as or as important as they might think they are. Now, this is a phrase that you will see because so much money is in politics and it's been in there. This is a phrase that you see a lot around people, and it's sometimes said as a joke, sometimes said as sort of serious, that some people say we have the finest Congress money can buy. Okay, and I put a question mark there because maybe we need to take a look at that. It actually might be the opposite, and it's the hyperpluralism thing. There are so many organizations on all different sides of the issue that the money may actually have less influence than it did before. It might have had more influence in the 80s than it does in the 2010s. Okay, something like that, because there's so many more of them. All right, if you go to this, and I can't show you it, if you click on this, once you have access to this, you will see this organization. One of the best ways that tracks all of the money out there is this group called OpenSecrets.org, and they will show you which organizations donated the most money. You can see which politicians took the most money, where the politicians got their money from, because it's all public access. And you can see the amount of money donated, the amount of money that PACs donated, the amount of money that super PACs donated. Again, we'll talk about that later on. And it's a great way to look at this, and maybe it's kind of eye-opening because the second most, I mention this all the time because you're like, wow, that's a weird organization. The second biggest giver of PAC money in the last election cycle of 2020 was the National Beer Wholesalers Association, just behind the National Realtors Association. And you can see all of that stuff, and sometimes it's kind of surprising, and it's very interesting if you just want to take a look at it. All right, so the last two slides. What else do they do? Civil disobedience. So we've seen the information stuff, we've seen the cues. Now they do political disobedience. We've seen money. So public displays and disruptive tactics, they do that too. Marches, sit-ins, picketing, violence, even violence. That does happen, right? It's been more prevalent since the 60s. The civil rights movement, the Vietnam protests, those kind of things. That is where we see that. You can look back in history and see that. They did the marches and the sit-ins and the picketing. and that kind of thing. Some groups did violence. Most of them were nonviolent in nature. The major ones, the SCLC, headed by MLK, and those kind of things were more peaceful in nature. And then, of course, you've got, say, the BLM movement these days. That is the thing that you can see doing civil disobedience these days. All right. Lastly, they are regulated, but why are they allowed? Okay, it is protected speech. This is First Amendment stuff. 3 parts of it: speech, association, and petition. Okay, interest groups are there because they're constitutional. You cannot stop them because it's protected speech, even if you don't like it. It's protected speech. Okay, but it does have regulation. Everything is regulated to some degree, right? But so there is some regulation. They have to register. Lobbyists have to be registered with the House and the Senate. So person X is a lobbyist, and they have to disclose that stuff. And the specific law says includes people who spend at least 20% of their time as lobbyists in whatever they're doing, their organizations that they work for. If they're lobbying at least 20% of the time, they have to register. Okay, if they're paid, at least $5,000 in a 6-month period for lobbying. Groups that spend more than $20,000 in a 6-month period have to register as a lobbying group. They can't give gifts. This used to be a big deal. They used to give gifts all the time, but as the regulations have come in, the campaign finance regulations have come in and grown, that there are now no gifts. You can't give them stuff. You can't give them trips. You can't give them stuff. They used to happen all the time. No reimbursement for travel costs. Spending must be disclosed. They can do little bits of spending. They can take you to dinner or something like that and pay for it. But they can't spend a lot, and every dollar has got to be disclosed. It's got to be public knowledge. And, excuse me, if a group lobbies, it can't be tax exempt. That is a big deal. Hang on just a second. All right, sorry, just had to cough for a second. Okay, so this is the last bit. If a group lobbies, it can't be tax exempt. So that gives you, just to get an idea. The NAACP itself as an interest group lobbies, so they pay taxes, but they have a separate group, and this is how it works with all these interest groups. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund, it does not lobby. So it's not a lobbyist organization. They do other things, so they're tax exempt. So the lobbyers have to pay taxes. Excuse me, the non-lobbyist portions don't have to pay. So they make these separations, things like that. So anyway, so that's interest groups. This is the only stuff you're going to get on it from me. And remember, there's a quiz coming up late next week, and so this information will be on it. So have a great weekend, and we'll see you.